You read the title of this video, so you know what you're getting into. Plenty of people like to use calligraphy or brush lettering in their bullet journal, myself included, so if you're a beginner to calligraphy or if you just want to brush up on your skills, this video is for you. I actually post a new video about bullet journaling like every week on my channel, so subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss another video, and let's get into it. So before we start actually doing calligraphy, the first thing to keep in mind is supplies. And we're going to start out with paper. Of course, there are multiple different types of paper, but today let's focus on textured versus smooth paper. Smooth paper is a lot easier for beginners because there's not as much grit to the paper, so it's easier to move your pen. And even if it's just copy paper, you want to make sure that when you're just starting out, the process is as easy as possible. Textured paper can also make your markers fray and split, so if you want to just take care of your brush pens, it might be easier to go with some smooth paper. Another thing to keep in mind is you might want to use grid paper or paper with lines on it. That way you have like a guideline to use when you're lettering. It's actually one of the things I love about bullet journaling is bullet journals usually have the grid pattern on the paper already, so it makes it really convenient when I'm doing lettering. Ugh, the hair is a struggle today. Okay, so the next thing you're going to want to get is a pencil. And this sounds a little counterproductive because you are doing calligraphy and you want a calligraphy pen, but when you're just starting out, I think it's important to sketch out all your shapes first, and so you might want to have a pencil on handy so you can do so. Okay, so now let's get into the different pen options. So there are of course the very traditional calligraphy pens, like the popular ones that I'm thinking of right now are Tombow Fudenosuke pens, hard tip versus soft tip. It's pretty much the same pen, just one nib is tougher than the other, the hard tip one, so it doesn't bend as easily, but they are super good for calligraphy, and because the nib is so small, they make really thin lines. Another one I'm thinking of is the Pentel Fude-Touch brush pen, and I talked about all of these pens in a video from a couple weeks ago where I mentioned some stationery recommendations and stationery that I hate, so if you want to check out that video, the link is down in the description box below. But the Pentel Fude-Touch brush pen is not my favorite brush pen, but it definitely still works, and so if you're more of an experienced bullet journalist and control the pen a little easier, this could be one you might want to look into. So now we come up with colorful brush pens. So these are more of the thicker ones that are a blend between brush pens and calligraphy pens and markers. So a couple ones that come to mind is of course Tombow dual brush pens, which I have a plethora of, and I love these for doing funky calligraphy, but usually for like black lettering, I'll just use a normal pen because they're definitely harder to control and make much bigger lines than I usually want for very simple like subheading calligraphy. And then another one that I'm thinking of are Arteza brush pens, which I don't actually have, but I've heard they're good quality, and also Artist Loft brush pens, which are also nice. So if you want a more cheaper option, those two would probably be good picks for you. And then of course you can go really traditional and do like a professional calligraphy pen. So I actually have a quill pen that I bought in Boston a couple years ago, and it was literally $40. Okay, such an expensive purchase, but I have never once used it for calligraphy. I'm actually scared to use it because it's so hard to control, but if you're really vintage, get yourself a quill pen and attempt to do calligraphy. You probably will be better than I am. Okay, so now that we have all the supplies down and you're ready to start lettering, let's get into the technique. So first, what you're gonna wanna do is find some inspiration. Now, I say this all the time when mentioning how to create bullet journal spreads and themes, but calligraphy is no different. There are all sorts of different styles that I'll mention later in the video, but if you go into Pinterest and look up some brush lettering styles or different calligraphy fonts, you can kind of focus on the style of lettering that you personally like. Of course, your lettering style will change and evolve as you keep practicing, but in the beginning, it is important to recognize if you like thicker or thinner strokes, if you prefer more italicized and elegant lettering, or just bouncy, bold fonts, whatever floats your boat. Then you need to grab your pencil. A lot of people start out with basic up and down strokes, but really you need to know what kind of strokes you're making first. So grab your pencil and try to replicate the pictures that you're seeing. Just start by writing simple words like hello or your name, but by sketching out the lettering style that you want to achieve, you're kind of training your brain to understand the certain curves and thickness changes in the lettering that is hard to pick out at first glance. So you can see here that I'm using my pencil to write out a couple words, and I'm trying out different thicknesses and styles to find out which one I like best. Okay, so now we can get into actually using your fancy pens. There are two strokes you usually need to keep in mind when lettering: upstrokes and downstrokes. So the upstrokes are the very light, thin strokes that obviously go upwards when you're writing, and they have the least amount of pressure on them. The purpose of a brush pen is it has a very thin nib, but when you press down on it, that makes the nib flatten out on the paper and make a thicker line. So the more pressure you add, the thicker the line is on your brush pen. Therefore, the downstrokes, which is the other strokes that go downwards on your paper, I mean, duh, you know, common sense, guys. On those, you can increase your pressure on the pen to make a thicker line. When practicing with a brush pen, you might want to try out a few different styles to make sure you know what kind of brush pen you want, but try going up and down and making U shapes and N shapes to kind of get yourself used to the feel of curving your pen and adding different pressures at different points. Speaking of pressure points, let's talk about the thickness of your lettering. So before we actually get into writing words in calligraphy, you might want to look at faux calligraphy. Faux calligraphy is basically sketching out what a word would look like if written with a brush pen, and you do this by adding a second line to every downstroke to make it appear thicker. This is so hard to explain, but hopefully you guys see from the demonstration on screen what I'm talking about. So just take your pencil first and do the exact same thing you were doing earlier, draw out the word that you want, and then add a second line on the left of every downstroke to make it just a little thicker and imitate calligraphy. So this is where you can focus on the point of thick and thin. When you're doing calligraphy, you will notice that the thickest point of your downstroke will vary depending on the letter or part of the letter that you're drawing. Here on the screen, I am drawing an H, and you can see that of course I start with a light upstroke and it's very light, and then I press down as I go down the downstroke. And the further down I get on the line, the lettering gets thicker and I'm putting more pressure in it. So the pressure point in the part that is thickest on that part of the H is at the bottom. But then when I curve up to make the hump of the H, you can see that I'm starting with an upstroke and then putting all the pressure right at the top before I scoop down to the bottom of the H. So at that point, the pressure would be near the top of the hump of the H. I'll do the same thing with the letter B here. So I start with the upstroke and I do a downstroke and press really hard when I get to the bottom of the letter. Then when I go to do the little circle part for the rest of the B, you can see that the pressure is at the top of the hump. I'm going to write out the alphabet for you right here, and hopefully you can kind of see what I mean by adding different points of pressure at different points of the lettering. This is just kind of what I do, and whenever you find out your style, it will definitely vary, but it's important to kind of notice these things so that whenever you start lettering yourself, you can learn where and when to press harder and thinner to get the lettering that you want to achieve. So some people only do faux calligraphy and just color in the little gaps between the lines to make it appear like calligraphy, which is totally fine. And if you're a beginner, that's probably something you might want to do for a little bit. But if you want to do actual calligraphy and just try your luck at it, then this is where the fun part begins. Try using your brush pen to start imitating the words you're making with your pencil and faux calligraphy. I guarantee your hand will be shaky and the lines will not be very clean, but so is everyone when they're first beginning. For reference, here are some pictures of calligraphy that I did when I was first learning at the beginning of 2020. Not good. Just make sure that you write very slowly and focus on the pressure points that we talked about earlier. Also, if it makes it easier, try to sketch your words first with a pencil and then go over it with your brush pen if that makes you more comfortable. Also, one thing that I realized is really cool when you're trying to learn calligraphy is going over things that someone else has already traced for you. This is not for everybody, but if you like my particular lettering style and want to learn how to do it for yourself, I do have a downloadable printable in the description box below where I lettered all of the alphabet, although in lowercase because I never do anything in uppercase, so hopefully you guys don't mind, but I have the entire alphabet and some numbers in lowercase so you guys can practice tracing over them and download it as many times as you want until you get the hang of at least how I personally do my calligraphy, and then you can imitate it on your own paper once you've got the hang of it. Okay, so now let's talk about adding your own style into your calligraphy, because although my calligraphy is pretty good, not gonna lie, but you probably have a different style that you want than mine. Remember those inspiration pictures we grabbed earlier? You're probably gonna want that back. There are 4 different ways you can add variety to your lettering, at least 4 different ways that I've thought of: height, width or thickness, angle, and spacing. So by looking at your inspiration pictures, you can kind of pinpoint the different special variations that the reference pictures have and add that to your own lettering. So first, you can add variety in the height of your lettering. Even when writing in print, there are always 3 rows where you're writing: the X height, the ascending, and the descending. Same goes for calligraphy. Imitate the same shapes when sketching and lettering with a brush pen as you would when writing normally, like in your journal. Personally, I have very bouncy calligraphy style, and so I will definitely extend my tall letters higher than the ascending line, and some of my low letters go much lower than the descending line. So extending past borders and lengthening your lettering can be a way to make it long and bouncy and kind of all over the place, let's be honest. But if you prefer really minimal and tight lettering, you can squish the characters in and minimize your lettering by having the tops of your T's not quite hit the ascending line, or having the bottoms of your Y's always brush a little short from the descending line. I hope what I'm saying makes sense. I'll have a reference here on the screen so you maybe can understand it better if you're like a visual learner. But along with height variations, you can also change up the thickness of your lettering. This all comes from the pressure that you're using and the particular type of brush pen. So like I mentioned earlier, some pens are thicker than others and have a looser nib. And so, for example, the hard tip is going to make a thinner line than the soft tip, which will make a thinner line than a Tombow brush pen. So you just have to kind of play with the pens. But also, no matter what pen you're using, the harder you press down makes a thicker line. And so just playing with that can add variety to your lettering. You can have thicker and chunkier calligraphy, or you can just hold your pen very lightly and have thinner and more elegant calligraphy. Or if you really don't want to add any variations in your thickness at all, you can do what's called monoline calligraphy, which is just think of like writing with a fine liner. You can't add any more thickness because there's no flexible nib. It's just all one thickness for the entire word. And honestly, I love monoline calligraphy because it's easy, straight to the point, very clean and minimal, and you can literally use it for any pen because you don't have to have a nib that's flexible. So it works perfectly. By the way, if you use super tips in your bullet journal, those are really great markers, but I never use them for calligraphy because technically they're advertised that you can use them because they have a little pointy nib, but it's not flexible in the slightest, so you don't have much variations in your lines. So I always use monoline calligraphy when I'm using a super tip because it's going to be the same thing as pretty much the entire time. So again, depends what I'm using. Just gotta check that out. Okay, next you can change up the angle. Now, this one is a little funky, but depending on how you hold your pen, you can make your lettering more italicized and elegant and traditional, or you can make it more stand up straight and blocky. Honestly, I think mine is pretty stand up straight, like there's not much slant to it, but if I'm trying to do a more elegant theme like my February bullet journal setup, which by the way, link in the card and description box below if you want to check it out, but that was more of a royalty and elegant theme, so I tried to slant my lettering a little bit so that it would seem like an old lady in a castle writing a traditional letter to her long lost lover or something like that. Also, if you're left-handed, that can make calligraphy really difficult, but it's all about the angles. So if you want to learn more about that, stick to the end of the video because I'll mention it there. And lastly, you can edit the spacing between each character. Now, I do not do this very often. I think all of my lettering is usually around the same space between each other, but if you like really minimal or drawn out lettering, you can really just make the upstrokes really long and angled and thin so you can last to the next letter and just kind of play around with how wide you want your letters to be. If you're in the typography world, I'm pretty sure this is called tracking. So the space between each character can be lengthened or shortened, whichever one you want. I'm planning to make a video soon where I talk about 25 or more, honestly, different styles of lettering that can include like ombre or drop shadows or highlights. So it's gonna be kind of like a part 2 to this video, which is already an updated calligraphy tutorial from the ones last year. But if you want to learn more about adding spice to your lettering, about changing up your style, adding color, adding some pretty fonts, you know, don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss out on that video, which will be coming out in a couple weeks or so. I'm very excited to make it for you guys. Okay, so we've gotten to the last part of the video, and that's going to be the Q&A section. So I asked you guys on Instagram and on my YouTube community tab page if you had any questions or concerns about calligraphy. By the way, if you want to get some more content from me, check out my Instagram at The Mingo Studio. I always post some background content there. Or if you don't have Instagram, check out the community tab because again, that's kind of where you can get involved in the community, so to speak, because I always ask you guys questions over there and put up polls and stuff. So check that out if you want to be involved in a video like this. Okay, so I have a list of questions here. I didn't get to pick all of them, but I picked some of the ones that I think would probably be more popular. So the first question asks, is it exclusive to brush pens? So no. I believe you can do lettering with any different kind of utensil, honestly. You can letter with a pencil, a pen like I was talking about, monoline calligraphy. You can do markers, highlighters, for goodness sakes. The point is, yeah, you can do lettering with it, and you can always do faux lettering with whatever supply you're using. But if you want to do calligraphy and like with the whole pressure and everything, it always depends on, of course, the supply that has to be made for that. So yes, you can make pretty lettering swirly things, but they might not always have the little downstrokes and upstrokes depending on the pen you're using, if that makes sense. This person asks, why is it so hard? And I put this in here because it's always going to be hard. I put the pictures in earlier that showed you guys. When I first started calligraphy, like over 2 years ago, it was rough. It's always a struggle when you start learning a new hobby, and especially something art related, it's going to be difficult. But you just kind of always have to stick through it, push through. It took me like 2 years to get this point, and my lettering is always evolving anyway. So I know you hate to hear this, but practice makes progress. And if you just stick with it, your lettering will keep changing, and it'll get better, and you'll find the different styles that you want, and you'll learn how to use drop shadows and things, and it'll be a good time. So it is hard, but just keep working at it and it'll get easier. So the next question is, how do I get finer lines? And I technically mentioned this earlier, but it is hard to get a difference in your calligraphy, especially if you're using looser pens. So like the Tombow Fudenosuke hard tip pen is very stiff, and so when you write on it normally, it won't even, the nib won't press down at all. And so without using any pressure or barely any pressure, even when using a little pressure, it won't really make much of a difference and it will still make a fine line. However, for much looser nibs like Tombow dual brush pens, for example, it does not take a lot of pressure for those to completely flatten on the paper, so you really have to keep a taut hand and hold your hand barely on the paper so that it makes a thin line. So it's really all about the pressure you're using and the control you have over the pen. And again, if you just keep practicing at it, you'll get easier. Just remember that you can always go thicker and add more, but you can't take it away unless you have a really good white gel pen, which technically, if you do, good on you, because white gel pens save everything, but it's just something to keep in mind, so I work on that pressure. And then this question. Okay, so this person asked, which I didn't even think about, by the way, until this person asked this, and I was like, oh my gosh, hold it. But this person asked, how do I letter with my left hand? I just had a mental breakdown. I was like, wait, because I'm right-handed and I don't have that problem. But I'm thinking it must be hard for people to write left-handed with normal pens at all, right? But with calligraphy and like pressure and smearing, oh my gosh, it sounds like a struggle. If you letter and you're left-handed, props to you, bud, okay? Because that is something that I never want to have to deal with. But I did Google it, so I have a couple tips for you. They all came from this blog right here. So credits to this person for putting up this blog and helping me answer your question. But apparently they do sell left-hand calligraphy or oblique holders. I'll put a picture on the screen, but it moves the nib of the pen so that even when writing, the nib is to the left of your hand, and so you're not smearing it as you go along, which I think is honestly genius, but I feel like it's gonna be hard to get used to. So if you don't wanna spend money or have time figuring out how to use a pen like that, you can also put like a piece of paper or a paper towel under your palm. That way you don't smear it. Or if you can, hold your pen farther down on the barrel. That way your hand is farther away from the line that you're drawing and therefore you won't mess with it. Whatever, you can try that. But honestly, again, if you can do calligraphy left-handed, you are a pro, you are better than me. And unfortunately, being right-handed, I don't really have the information to help you, but you got it, bud. I believe in you. And then the last person that I'm mentioning here said, I stand it. And honestly, thank you. I stand it too. Anyways, so that's going to be the end of this updated tutorial from last year. Really hope you guys enjoyed this video and weren't bored to death, because I was rewatching last year's video and I was just crying because I was like, why did I publish this? It looks so bad. Anyways, but if you haven't already, don't forget to go down and hit that lovely subscribe button down below and subscribe to my channel. I post all sorts of bullet journaling videos and productivity videos and now studio vlogs again. That one came out last week, so that was a fun time. I am going to be posting a video soon where I talk about calligraphy and different styles that you can use, including ombre and drop shadows and highlights and drawing and all the different things. So if you want to see that video, make sure you subscribe, stick around for that. Also check out my Instagram at The Mingo Studio. We have a good time there. I've been posting all of my February spreads. And lastly, if for some reason you get tired of calligraphy and want to look into the stickers area, I have an Etsy shop called Mingo Prints where I post stickers, and it's February 12th, but still time to get in a last minute or slightly belated Valentine's Day gift for a loved one or yourself. Treat yourself. So if you're interested, the link to my sticker shop is always in the description box below. And I think that's it. Happy Valentine's Day. I love you guys very much. Hope you have a great week, and I will see you next week. Toodles. Can I just say, the eyeliner really popped off today. Like, I don't really try to do makeup in my bullet journal. I don't usually try to do makeup on my videos because I'm all here for the natural look, but like, she popped off.